Remember, this is the time of the color white. This color reminds us of new, fresh beginnings. Remember, we started with the three Marys who went to the tomb. And remember that when they got there, Jesus was not there. And yet, in his absence, they still felt his presence. And then last week we heard the story about the two men walking to Emmaus, and how a stranger joined them, and how when the stranger broke the bread, they realized that it was Jesus. Well, I have another story to tell you. It was later, another night, a dark night in Jerusalem, and the disciples had gathered together in a room, and they locked the windows, and they shut and locked the doors, because they were worried that the soldiers might come and try to take them away, just like they had taken Jesus away. And then suddenly they heard a voice say, "Peace be with you." And it was Jesus. The disciples, shocked, thought, "What? Is it a ghost?" But he talked with them, and they could see his wounds. He even ate some fish. And as they sat and talked, Jesus opened up the scriptures to them, just like he had the two men in Emmaus. And after a while, Jesus again said, "Peace be with you." And then he was gone. Well, the next day, Thomas, who had not been with them the night before, heard the story from his friends. They told him all about what had happened the night before, but Thomas didn't believe them. He said, "No, I won't believe until I can touch his wounds myself. I doubt. I really doubt, all the way down to my bones." I mean, why wouldn't Thomas doubt? It's kind of a hard story to believe, isn't it? All these stories where the hearts and minds of the disciples were being stretched so big as they learn how to know Jesus in this new way. Well, about 8 days later, the disciples gathered again in a room, and again they locked the windows and shut and locked the doors. And they heard the voice, "Peace be with you." And there was Jesus. And he walked right up to Thomas, who was there that night, and he held out his hand, and he said, "Touch me." Well, Thomas was so overcome that he simply fell to his knees and said, "My Lord, my God." And Jesus gazed upon him and asked, "Do you believe because you have seen?" And then he looked around at the circle of the other disciples, and he said, "Blessed are those who believe, but have not yet seen." And then he was gone. I wonder what your favorite part of today's story is. I wonder what the disciples thought when Jesus appeared to them in a locked room. I wonder why Thomas needed to touch Jesus' wounds. I wonder what Thomas thought when Jesus appeared, came up to him, and said, "Touch me." I wonder if you've ever had any doubts about anything. I wonder how that feels. I wonder what we can do when we have doubts about believing. This week's Bible lesson can be found in John chapter 20, verses 19 through 31. It was still the first day of the week. That evening, while the disciples were behind closed doors, because they were afraid of the Jewish authorities, Jesus came and stood among them. He said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. When the disciples saw the Lord, they were filled with joy. Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father sent me, so I am sending you." Then he breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive anyone's sins, they are forgiven. If you don't forgive them, they aren't forgiven." Thomas, one of the 12, wasn't with the disciples when Jesus came. The other disciples told him, "We've seen the Lord." But he replied, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, put my fingers in the wounds left by the nails, and put my hand into his side, I won't believe." After 8 days, his disciples were again in a house, and Thomas was with them. Even though the doors were locked, Jesus entered and stood among them. He said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Touch me, put your finger here, look at my hands, Put your hand into my side. No more disbelief. Believe." Thomas responded to Jesus, "My Lord and my God." Jesus replied, "Do you believe because you have seen me? Happy are those who don't see and yet believe." Then Jesus did many other miraculous signs in his disciples' presence, signs that aren't recorded in this scroll. But these things are written so that you will believe in Jesus the Christ, God's Son, that believing you will have life in his name.